Look, I want to jump into this. I was watching a bunch of your videos recently, and one of them, you were talking about straight out, look, I eat a dozen or 2 dozen eggs per day, 3 to 4 pounds of meat, and that's what you eat. And I'm sure when you tell most people that, they look at you and think, well, how is that possible? And I want to talk about that today and talk about some of the myths and some of the conceptions and misconceptions. Just to remind people, I spent a year as a vegan. I trained for an Ironman competition as a vegan, and I went through the whole thing. I got to be friends with some of the top vegans like John Joseph and Rich Roll. I also had Charles Poliquin come in here during that movie and call them all idiots. It was fascinating at the time, and may he rest in peace, by the way. It was great to have Charles here. And he's like the bad guy in the movie, but later as I went back to meet, I kind of understood what he was talking about. But I've been through that lifestyle. And towards the end of that year, I was just asking myself, am I staying vegan to be dogmatic? Because I have a tendency to do things until they're not worth doing anymore, like drinking and drugs. And I thought, wait a second. And I remember I had some sushi and some red meat a year later, and my body was like, yep, this is where we want to be. So I've been there. I'd love to get your experiences. Where do we start? What are most people's initial reaction when they hear about your lifestyle, your diet?
Yeah, well, most people obviously think it's crazy, and I thought it was crazy when I heard about it, 6 years ago when I began this journey. And I think it's because we are so used to a Western culture. This meat-based diet is very common throughout the world, different parts of the world. We can look at Nilotic African tribes, we can look at circumpolar tribes, we can look at Mongolians, southern Brazil and Argentina with the gaucho population. So it depends on your perspective as to what's normal. In the United States, a meat-based diet is crazy. In Mongolia, that's Tuesday. It's just normal, parts of the world. And so I've had a lot of people now do this. Like you mentioned, tens upon tens of thousands of people. And so now we have more data points that are showing that there is something here, and we are seeing significant improvement. I think, we're seeing this big push towards plant-based. You can't not be aware of this, right? And so what we're ultimately going to see with that is a drive to more and more processed foods. And this is the problem. This is why we see people that go on a whole food plant-based diet, they do see some improvement in their health. The same thing we're happening when we go on a whole food animal-based diet. The same things start to happen. The difference is with a whole food animal-based diet, you don't have the issues with fragility, healing issues, the mental health issues that are often associated. We have several scientific studies that show that plant-based diets are associated with higher rates of mental health disorders, osteoporosis and fractures, poor healing, and then all kinds of different deficiency states, stunting in children. And so we don't have that on a meat-based diet. And so it's been very, very interesting to see. Harvard University has now done a study on the carnivore diet. We've got 2,000 people on the diet. Something like 92% of the diabetics came off their insulin completely. 100% of them came off all other injectable medications, and I think 84% came off all oral medications, which is, there's no other intervention for diabetes that works that powerfully. Yeah. So we're seeing some really, really neat stuff.
So you're saying there's a couple things going on here. If you go full carnivore, almost by definition, you're not eating those processed foods.
Right.
Whereas most Americans, whether they want to admit it or not, are eating lots of processed foods, right? Whether you're vegan, whether you think you're healthy, whether you're an athlete, you're probably putting a lot of nonsense in your body.
Yeah, it's interesting because we're getting this push to, we see these Beyond Meat burgers, these Impossible burgers, these Cricket burgers, they want to see bugs now. And basically what they do is they refine these foods and they process them so heavily, they turn them into powders. And you think about it, could we ever have eaten powders in the wild? If you and I went out hunting, foraging around and, out in the UK, we would not come into powder. We wouldn't have a way to turn things into powder. And so the more of these powders we consume, it actually changes the absorption characteristics of the food. And so our microbiome, which normally will actually consume up to 22% of our food, they don't do that when it's powderized because it's bypassed. It doesn't need to have that done. So it's interesting, in the United States in the last 30 years, we've had a dramatic increase in the obesity. I'm here in the UK, I'm glad to see you're not where we are at the United States yet. We're still
Is it
about
noticeable?
You're about 20 years behind, I think. I think in 20 years, the UK will catch up to where we are in the United States.
You look around London, you're like, wow, there's not so many fat people.
Absolutely.
It's noticeable.
Absolutely.
Even in the airports and stuff,
Absolutely.
It's noticeable.
Absolutely. Most of the time when I see fat people here, they're American tourists. Sad to say. But as we consume more and more of these powders, like I said, in the last 30 years, it's the data on food consumption in the United States has shown no increase in food consumption. There's no calorie increase in either food availability or calorie consumption, and yet our obesity rates have continued to skyrocket.
No calorie increase.
No calorie increase,
Really?
and no change in activity level. Yeah, that's
Really?
what the data actually shows right now. Now, prior to that, from 1960 to about 1990, we saw about a 300 calorie per day increase.
Okay.
But since 1990, it's been flat, and obesity rates have continued to climb. And the thought is, because we're consuming these ultra-processed foods, which bypass a lot of the microbiome, we absorb more calories. We also set ourselves up for gut dysbiosis, gut permeability issues, and that drives continued, weight gain. So it's a very interesting dynamic.
Wow, that surprises me. I just assumed we were drinking more, sweet drinks, and there was more high fructose corn syrup.
We're actually eating a little bit less sugar than we were 15, 20 years ago, surprisingly.
Wow.
But our caloric consumption has not really gone up at all.
But we're heavier, and
we're definitely heavier. Yeah.
And that's because what you think is the makeup of the food.
I think
and what's happening
the
to
nature and the
gut
quality of
biome.
the food has changed significantly, so that it's not what we eat. The calories are not what we eat; it's what we actually absorb.
Right.
And so, if we're absorbing more of the calories, we don't have to eat as much to do that. And the nice thing about a meat-based diet is there's a difference between acellular food, these are the powders, and food that's still in its whole form. So when you take a steak, piece of chicken, an egg, or even ground beef, the cells are still intact. But once you put it through that high-level industrial processing, all the cells have been broken down. The energy, particularly with carbohydrates, there's so much more available to us, and so we just basically absorb more calories.
Hey, it's Brian Rose, founder of the DeFi Academy. I've told you my 4-week crypto bootcamp is amazing, but don't take my word for it. This is what my students are saying.
The DeFi Academy was an amazing experience for me. It took me totally out of my comfort zone.
In this course, I was challenged, I was held accountable, and pushed to do things that honestly weren't always easy.
It's been phenomenal, and I can't believe we're already up on our 4 weeks. It has flown by.
Going through this DeFi accelerator by far was one of the best courses I've taken.
You do this course, you really get into the nitty-gritty of the activities that will make you comfortable with decentralized finance.
Thank you so much to Brian and everyone at London Real and the DeFi Academy for even putting together an amazing course like this.
Anybody else that wants to do it, please sign up. It is well worth the money.